Hello everybody. Today's Stockholm lightning. I found a picture of lightning over Stockholm. Because that's what it said it was. I believe it. That looks Stockholmy to me. I can't be sure, but I think it's probably Stockholm. So the topic for today is, how big is Stockholm? This is something that I get now and then, and I remember asking the question a long time ago. People wonder, compared to what other things, like how many people and how much space does this thing take up? And I started thinking about this, and sometimes I try and give an answer. I say, well, it's about as many people as Minneapolis and St. Paul, but people haven't been there. They don't know what that is like. So it's like, well, I started thinking that maybe a good way to explain this is in reference to something that a lot of people have some familiarity with. So I started thinking about New York City. I've never lived in New York City, and I've spent very little time there, but I've consumed so much culture, media, and TV and movies that I have some sort of understanding of how big it is. And the little time I've spent there seems to roughly, I roughly know. I know how long time it takes to drive kind of across Brooklyn and that sort of thing. I've been there enough to know that. So I'm going to explain how big Stockholm is in terms of New York City somewhat. So here's a map of Stockholm, and the weird blue shape outlined in there, this is the shape and size, roughly, of the island of Manhattan. So if you took Manhattan and dropped it on Stockholm, that's how much space it would cover. So I want to do this to give you kind of a sense of the physical scale of these places. While I was looking into this, I also found that the distance from Battery Park, which is the southern tip of Manhattan, up to, say, Columbia University, which is not the northern edge, but is up north, that's pretty much the exact same distance as from, say, T-Centralen in the middle of Stockholm to Täby Centrum.
It's really far.
It's pretty far. I mean, Manhattan is a big island. It's a lot bigger than the most of the islands that Stockholm is made up of, for example. The same distance is actually about the same from Brooklyn Heights to Coney Island. So we don't think about driving across Brooklyn. That's a similar distance. It's about the same distance, about the same amount of time if you're taking public transportation with these things too. It's much faster to drive in a car to Täby than it is to drive to either of these places within New York City. So about 1.6 million people live in Manhattan in that blue shape. So for comparison, I thought I'd see how much space are we talking about in Stockholm for the same amount of people. And that looks like this. This is, I drew roughly the shape of what is considered like the, what do they call it? Tätort, like the most heavily populated area of Stockholm. And this is about 1.6 million people that's outlined in red here. So it's a pretty big difference in how compact things are. So let's call this urban Stockholm. So urban Stockholm has a density of about 11,000 people per square mile, whereas Manhattan has about 70,000 people per square mile. So I just thought it was kind of interesting once I started playing with this and looking at these things, and I found some other geographical areas of New York City that could be compared to geographical areas of Stockholm as well. So I next started looking at Queens, a much bigger piece of New York City. So just like the roughly the area of Queens, it's very similar to that area of urban Stockholm in terms of size. This is a pretty similar amount of space. And I laid out, so this blue shape here is roughly the shape of Queens. But Queens has 2.3 million people in it, which is a lot of people. And so if you want to find out how much of Stockholm do we have to grab to get 2.3 million people, we have to actually zoom out a bit. So here is Stockholm in a larger perspective, and the blue shape still shows where, the size and shape of Queens. Well, 2.3 million people, that's pretty similar to what is actually the entire Stockholm County is 2.2 million people. And that's that much space. So it's a much bigger space to find a similar amount of people. And then while I was doing this, I thought I should actually take it to the next logical step, which is let's look at all of New York City. So this blue shape is all of New York City. Queens, Brooklyn, Manhattan, Staten Island, whatever else, I don't really know. I don't know the names of all the places. So if you laid it out there, it covers up pretty much a huge chunk of the Stockholm metro area. But this is 8 or 9 million people. So of course you want to find the number of people to match that. You have to go all the way. It's all of Sweden, of course. So that little blue blob has as many, in New York City, has as many people as the entire country of Sweden. Now you could probably get like 95% of the way there by eliminating a big chunk of the non-coast part of northern Sweden, but still. Anyway, that's pretty much all I had. I just thought this was sort of a fun thing to sort of do once I started looking into it. It was pretty interesting to sort of compare. And I guess I don't have like a clear answer still of how big is Stockholm, but I feel like having done this, I actually have a little bit more grasp of it now, just of like the general sort of size and density of this thing compared to New York City.